Hey guys, it's Danny. Today we're talking about Phalaenopsis orchids. We're gonna have a Phalaenopsis day. I just brought inside the grow room all of the Phalaenopsis I had on the terrace. I made another kind of grow space for them. I just put them all together and I realized I have a lot of Phalaenopsis orchids. Oh my goodness. So I'm gonna show you their display places or grow spaces for the time being. Take a little look, see how they're doing, and pretty much wrap this entire year. Tell you my end of the year thoughts on how Phalaenopsis did this year and whatever else will come to mind. So first of all, let me show you the new grow space I arranged. Alright, so the shelf you just saw was the outside shelf. It usually doesn't sit in my grow room, but these shelves do. And up until now, they weren't very populated because, especially in winter, being that the sun is lower in the sky and behind this shelf there is a wall, I did not have enough light for pretty much any orchid on this segment and absolutely zero light down there. I was just storing pots and other things. It was pretty much a mess. Last year, I even did an experiment. I had my Sun Passat Phalaenopsis on this very shelf with no additional lighting, just so I see where the lower limit of light for Phals is. And it didn't really want to bloom. It did eventually after I moved it, but yeah, certainly wasn't enough. So I installed some LED tubes. And there they are. These are two separate shelves, so I daisy chained the tubes. I have a separate video in which I show you how I mount them and talk a little bit more about them. You'll find it in the description or in the info card on the screen. Basically, since this tube does not heat up quite at all, I just mounted it with some zip ties to this metal wire shelf, and hey presto, we have light. It is as simple as that. And being that I'm not a very crafty person, it was perfect. And it is enough light for Phalaenopsis. Generally, Phals are really not highlight plants, and as I noticed last year when I grew them under some IKEA lamps, they can bloom and they can look spectacular under quite modest light. But this does not mean that they like the dark. And as I was saying, this entire shelf was pretty dark. So really, one tube makes all the difference for these orchids. In the summer, this area will get a little bit more light, but now in winter, really, sunlight does not reach here. But that is okay. These orchids do not necessarily need sunlight. They can do very well with these tubes, and because I did get this question quite a lot, no, this is not special plant light. I don't use that grow light that you see in other videos, the pinky light. My eyes cannot stand it. I tend to film a lot and I want to be able to show what I'm growing, and I just discovered that it's not really needed all that much for Phalaenopsis orchids. So that's why I do not use specific plant light. This is a 4000K color temperature light bulb. It is daylight. It is not warm, it is not cool. It's somewhere in between. I like it, and the orchids seem to like it as well. On the upper shelf, I do get a little bit of sunlight, as you can see, but it's not all day, and definitely when it's cloudy, there will be no sun on this shelf. But it's still more than enough for Phalaenopsis orchids. I don't shut down the LED tubes whenever sun is present as well. The more light, the better, especially in winter. And I'm also not changing the duration in which the light stays on. I always keep it at 12 hours. I have it set from 7 in the morning to 7 at night, and that's perfect. These orchids, and in the case of the hybrids, the ancestor of these orchids, come from very close to the equator locations on the globe. So in their natural habitat, they don't experience much difference between day and night throughout the year. So it's perfectly fine for Phalaenopsis orchids and many other orchids to have a 12-hour-a-day light schedule, which you can keep all throughout the year. So now that we talked a little bit about the setup, let's just take a look at the orchids. On this particular shelf, I have quite a lot of summer blooming orchids. I have the Bellina, I have a Violacea hybrid. Some of these will not bloom or will stop blooming during winter time because it's simply not their season. But I do have some hybrids which will bloom during winter as well, even though I think they can pass as novelties. They are related to the summer blooming orchids, but they bloom in the winter because they are complex hybrids, and this is one of them. Ah, there we have it. We have a beautiful flower spike here. This is one of my favorites. It is the Sogo grape. It's a pure red Phalaenopsis orchid. Has a very similar flower to the Bellina, except the color of course, but it does not bloom in the summertime. And like her, there are quite a few. At this point, I'm not sure if it really matters if a hybrid is a novelty or not, because they're just so complex. that they could look like a Bellina but bloom in winter and grow in summertime, just like the complex hybrids on the market. So who will bloom? It will be a surprise for me as well. But indeed, Bellinas and Violaceas and their very close hybrids or primary hybrids, they do tend to bloom in the summertime and take a break during winter time. This does not mean that they go dormant or they take a break from growing. No, they just take a break from blooming, but they do grow. Down here we have all of my minis, and as you can see, some of them are really not minis anymore. When I purchased them, they were very tiny. They appear to be kind of medium-sized orchids. Again, it happens with these complex hybrids, but it's okay. Let's just say I have the tiniest Phalaenopsis here. These are all winter blooming because they were purchased at the local flower shop. They're not novelties. They're not quote-unquote special, but they're beautiful, and I absolutely love mini Phalaenopsis. And I do see a lot of flower spikes starting to develop. And the good thing with these orchids is that their spikes will not be very tall, so I can totally keep them here on this shelf in full bloom, and I will not run the risk of the flowers just hitting the light bulb and drying out or getting damaged. On the second shelf, again, we have a combination of novelties and Polychilus subgenus. Some are bloomers and special hybrids, but again, it will be a surprise which will bloom when. There are a few that I just received from my viewer Veronica, which are starting to spike as well, like this one. And I did see another one, but I forgot which one. This is the Gigantea, which I just received, growing like nothing ever happened. And down below here, we have a few more Phalaenopsis, which again, they tend to be complex hybrids, but not necessarily flower shop Phalaenopsis. These are the ones that I received last year from Jessica. They are flower shop Phals, but they're very dear to me. Others are not from the flower shop. Many of them are from Orchids Deluxe, which are just so incredible on Phalaenopsis hybrids. If you are a Phalaenopsis enthusiast, I will link their website down below. They're a great nursery for hybrids and novelty Phals and all of that. And no, I'm not associated with them. I just like their nursery. Now this shelf used to be outside, and this is a shelf with all of my standard Phalaenopsis, let's say flower shop Phalaenopsis, except for the Leodoro, which is so big that it would not really fit so well in the other shelf. And the reason this shelf was outside until now was that I was trying to trigger flowering earlier, because in this room there is such a thing as thermal or temperature inertia. What I'm trying to say is that outside it cools down faster than in this room because the walls still radiate warmth. So I moved them outside in the hopes that I could make them spike faster, but guess what? This year we had a super prolonged summer / autumn, whatever that was. We were still having 34 degrees Celsius in October, and in the nighttime temperatures did not go below 20 degrees Celsius outside and inside. So it really didn't make any difference at all because all of my Phals, these ones and the ones inside, are very, very late with their flower spikes. It is the ending of November and some of them are just starting to spike. So it is the latest I've ever had them, and it all has to do with temperature. So that's why they were outside, but now it is pretty cool outside and it gets cool in the grow space as well. It was a very abrupt transition, so it doesn't matter anymore because my experiment is ruined. Anyway, so I brought them in and I've decided to bring them in together with the shelf because I don't have any more space for them, and they do actually receive sun here. In the winter time, all of the greenhouse is pretty bright since the sun stays on a lower level in the sky, so I believe they will do just fine here. They absolutely do not need bright, intense sunlight or anything of the sorts. So let's get you in closer and see how they're doing. Now, if you're older on my channel, you know that about 2 or 3 years ago, I left the flower spikes be. I didn't stake them. Last year, I staked them just to see how it looks like. And they were looking very, very pretty, but you know what? I think I do prefer them unstaked. And of course, you can see this shelf is not all that tall, so even if I try to stake them, the height here is simply not enough. So I would much rather them cascade their flower spikes like this, and I think it would be a really nice shelf. So most of them, if not all of them, do have flower spikes, but in various degrees of growth, since, as I was saying, everybody is very, very late. Now, some hybrids can initiate flower spikes even if the temperature don't go as low as 17°C, and I do have a few of those with taller flower spikes, but some hybrids simply do not want to spike. if the temperatures do not go below 20 degrees Celsius. And I think this is one that, oh no, we do have a flower spike, but you can see this flower spike is just forming. Since we're on the subject of Phalaenopsis blooming, one of my viewers suggested that I make a sort of video talking about the changes that a Phalaenopsis goes through prior to blooming. And one of those changes was losing the older leaves. And while the suggestion was more like talking about the signs that Phalaenopsis give us when they are about to bloom. But really, in my experience, Phalaenopsis do not give you any signs that they're about to bloom because it really depends on environment. First of all, regarding the older leaves, Phals lose leaves whenever they feel like. Usually in the springtime for me, not necessarily now. As you can see, not all of them have old yellowing leaves, which, P.S., it's normal. They shed regularly to regenerate their leaf system. So I have that one, which you saw, and I think I have another one in the back here. But other than that, they really are not yellowing prior to producing a flower spike. That is just coincidence. A Phalaenopsis orchid can start to lose bottom leaves even in the springtime before new leaves start to grow. So I don't consider that a sign of spiking. Also, no more new leaves are growing when a Phalaenopsis is preparing a flower spike. False. It has to do again with environment. In my previous environment, the, let's say, summer lasted as long as these orchids created about 2 leaves. And when the second leaf was fully grown, typically cool down started and the Phalaenopsis started to initiate a flower spike. In this environment, things do not work like that. Things are very unpredictable. Hence, many of my Phalaenopsis, can you see this, are just in the process of growing new leaves. What will happen with some of them, not all of them, is that these new leaves will be paused. The orchid will bloom, it will do its thing, and sometime in the spring, when all of the blooms are about done, the new leaf will start to grow again to its full capacity. Up until then, it will stay like this. So, it is not actually a rule that a Phalaenopsis will have completely mature leaves before it blooms. It can bloom whenever it feels like it. Whenever it feels the drop, it will bloom, it will pause whatever it's doing and initiate the flower spike. In my previous environment, rarely did I have tiny new leaves just growing while the cool down was happening, so I never had to deal with something like this. But in this environment, every year it's the same story. My orchids are caught off guard, still growing, temperature drop happens, oops, it's time to pause everything we're doing and start producing spikes. What to do? That is that. So again, we cannot talk about a habit or a sign that the orchid is preparing a flower spike. I honestly, and with the utmost objectivity that I can provide, cannot say that I see signs or patterns or things you should look out for that tell you your orchid is about to spike. No, it will spike if it wants to. When you see the spike forming, that's when it's gonna spike. It sounds a little funny, but it's the truth. You cannot know when it's gonna spike. You can predict if you offer the temperature drop, and in most cases it will happen, but other than that, there are no external signs that I can say with 100% accuracy that will happen. Sometimes they will happen, sometimes they won't. Depends also on the hybrid. Let's put you back on the tripod because my wrist is really hurting. This DSLR is very heavy in comparison to my older one. Alrighty, so final thoughts on the summer bloomers that I tried to grow outside. I was not happy with their growth necessarily. They grew vegetatively better, indeed. They produced more leaves, they grew bigger, they grew faster, but they didn't bloom as nice as they did in the grow space. So I think the extreme temperatures helped them grow vegetatively, but when it came to blooming, it only happened in the autumn, and autumn wasn't very long. It was very hot and then kind of warm and then cool abruptly. So my Bellina is only producing 1 flower and I don't see any other buds forming because it's already kind of cold. And all summer long she grew leaves. So even though they grew very nicely, they didn't bloom so well, and I much rather prefer how they grow and bloom in the grow space. So my plan for next year is to keep them here. This will be a permanent location for them. I will not grow them outside anymore, even though they can absolutely handle the heat. I prefer to have them more in bloom. As for the standard flower shop Phalaenopsis, I do want to make an experiment. I will try to grow them outside. Not all of these will be as heat tolerant, I think, as the summer blooming ones, but I want to try it out. I want to see how they behave, and if I see they struggle, I will just move them back. The goal of this experiment will be to have a really good vegetative growth with these guys, because these orchids don't produce new spikes during summertime anyway. If I can promote better vegetative growth with keeping them in the heat, then I will do so. They will not sit in the sun, of course. They will be placed in total shade, and they will have brightness coming from reflections from outside. I'll keep them very well watered, very well fertilized, and fingers crossed, they will grow even bigger. Can you imagine? Even bigger than this? Well, the bigger and healthier the orchid, the better the flower spike will be. So that's the goal. As for the minis, they don't bother anybody here, so I will just keep them here. They grow very well in the grow room as well. I don't want to necessarily put them outside. I'm not expecting big showy flower spikes from these guys. They're minis, they have tiny flowers, kind of tiny flower spikes in comparison to the other phals, even though they can produce a lot of flowers. So I don't have a goal with these. I'll keep them right here. And these guys, since they are a combination between Polychilus and the standard Phalaenopsis, I'll just keep them here as well because they're not big. I don't necessarily want to improve growth, and I don't want to potentially stress them. If it turns out they don't like the outside world, I don't want to stress these guys because they are special. So everybody who's on the shelves will remain on the shelves. Everybody who's on the other IKEA metal shelf, those will go outside. You might have noticed that a few orchids are missing. For example, the Schilleriana, which is a species, but she's not a summer bloomer, and the Stuartiana, and I'll show you another one. I don't have any more space on those shelves for them, so they sit on my main shelf, let's say. They enjoy the light, and they're still around, currently producing flower spikes. So the Schilleriana has a little flower spike here. The Stuartiana yellow has a flower spike here. And the variegated Amabilis has no flower spike anywhere. I don't see a flower spike on this one this year. Maybe she will produce it late or not, I don't know. She's a very young plant. I will not mind if she doesn't want to bloom this year. That's okay. I much more prefer the foliage. And also the flowers are white. I have a lot of white phals. I'm not gonna miss her flowers. I adore the foliage. I will keep her always on this shelf because it's the first shelf that I see when I enter the grow room, and I like to see pretty stuff. So Schilleriana, Stuartiana, and this one, I think they will still be here no matter the season. Oh, there are a few others that are kind of new to my collection. They reside on this shelf as well because they're not very established and I want to keep an eye on them. This one I purchased about a year and a bit ago, and it's growing so incredibly slow. I don't know if there's something wrong with it, but it's just not growing at all. So she's here as well because I want to monitor her, and I think those are all of my Phalaenopsis. And that's about it on my Phalaenopsis collection updates and future plans and a wrap up of the year. I think it will take about another 2 months before we start to see really nice blooms on these orchids. So until then, I'm not gonna bother staking them or anything of the sorts. If you want to learn how to stake Phalaenopsis orchids, I'll link it down below to some more videos that talk about it. You can actually train flower spikes using the light source. You can use stakes. Anyway, you'll see what I mean if you visit the description below. So with that said, I think it's time to end. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you had a good time, and you know the drill. Like or dislike this video below. Subscribe to my channel for regular orchid videos, tutorials, experiments, and African violet videos from time to time. And if you wish to support the channel, do consider visiting the merch store down below. And with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!